Jamie Stroud had never meant to propose marriage to an alien vampire princess, especially not one from the notoriously formal Noctari species, whose diplomatic reputation was built on equal parts fear and respect throughout the galaxy. Yet, here he was, watching Princess Valeth Nyx's obsidian eyes widen just enough to indicate surprise, a rarity for her kind, as his translator implant projected his words across the conference chamber. "If I weren't terrified of you, I might have proposed right now." The words hung in the recycled air of Sargasso Bloom Station, a floating diplomatic hub that resembled nothing so much as a metallic water lily drifting through the stars. Jamie had meant it as a joke, a tiny release valve for the pressure of 16 straight hours, translating delicate trade negotiations. The chamber went silent. Even the ambient hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause. The Noctari delegation, tall figures draped in what looked like liquid shadow, froze in perfect unison. Their violet-tinged skin gleamed under the station's artificial light as they turned toward their leader with mechanical precision. Princess Valeth, her silver-streaked hair pulled into an elaborate crown of braids that signified her royal lineage, placed one 7-fingered hand flat on the negotiation table. The gesture sent ripples through the photosensitive material, creating concentric circles that slowly faded outward. "Translate again," she commanded, in a voice that reminded Jamie of cellos being played in a cathedral. "I wish to be certain of what I heard." Jamie's implant wouldn't let him lie, not in an official diplomatic setting. The words came out again, this time with an apologetic tinge that was entirely his own addition. The Noctari delegation murmured among themselves, a sound like distant waves. "Interesting," said Princess Valeth, after exactly 17 seconds of silence. "The ancient rites are clear on this matter. I acknowledge your proposal, and will consider it according to the traditions of my people." Jamie felt his stomach drop faster than a ship losing artificial gravity. "No, wait, I was just—" "Ambassador Stroud," interrupted the station's AI mediator. Murray, her holographic form materializing between them. "It appears a cultural misunderstanding has occurred. However, the Noctari diplomatic records have already logged this interaction as a formal proposal of union." "That's impossible," Jamie sputtered. "I was making a joke." Murray's holographic face remained placid. "Humor does not translate as an exemption in Noctari diplomatic protocol, according to subsection 437B of the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Agreement. Once recorded, such proposals cannot be invalidated without mutual consent or official arbitration." Princess Valeth's expression hadn't changed, but something in her posture suggested amusement. "I accept the situation as it stands. According to our traditions, I must now evaluate the worth of the one who seeks union with our bloodline." "I didn't seek," Jamie began. But Murray played a short, warning chord that sounded suspiciously like the opening notes of a Beethoven symphony. "The Noctari have agreed to suspend trade negotiations for 7 standard days." The AI explained. "During this time, Ambassador Stroud and Princess Valeth will engage in the traditional Noctari courtship evaluation period." "We will begin immediately," said Valeth, rising to her full height, at least 7 feet tall, with a grace that made Jamie think of predators on the hunt. Jamie swallowed hard. What had started as a throwaway joke after a marathon translation session was now, apparently, an interplanetary incident. The entire Galactic Council would hear about this. His supervisor back on Earth would definitely hear about this. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself. Princess Valeth inclined her head slightly. "Oh, but it is, Ambassador Stroud, and I find myself intrigued by your unorthodox approach." Murray's hologram expanded, filling the room with what Jamie recognized as Mozart's Marriage of Figaro overture. The AI had a terrible sense of humor. "The diplomatic quarters on Level 7 have been prepared," Murray announced cheerfully. "According to Noctari tradition, You will share living space for the evaluation period, under neutral supervision. Whose supervision? Jamie asked weakly. Marai's hologram flickered with what might have been a smile. Mine, of course. As Princess Valeth glided toward the exit, her entourage forming a perfect crescent behind her. She paused, just long enough to look back at Jamie. Bring nothing but yourself, Ambassador, she said. Everything else will be provided. The doors sealed behind the Noctari delegation with a pneumatic hiss that sounded to Jamie like the universe laughing at him. What just happened? He asked the empty room. You proposed marriage to a vampire princess. Marai's voice replied cheerfully from a nearby speaker. And I must say, as cultural misunderstandings go, this one is quite impressive. Jamie dropped his head into his hands. What am I supposed to do now? I suggest packing light, said Marai, and perhaps reviewing Noctari marriage customs. They're quite fascinating, especially the blood rights section. Blood rights? Jamie's head snapped up. Just kidding, the AI replied, though your heart rate spike was informative. Jamie glared at the nearest camera. Not funny, Marai. On the contrary, the AI replied. Your predicament registers at 7.8 on my humor analytics scale. And besides, Ambassador, it could be worse. How could this possibly be worse? You could have accidentally proposed to a Gorvalian. Their courtship ritual involves ritual spine removal. A pause. I'm not joking about that one. Jamie sighed and stood up. 7 days. I just need to survive 7 days with a Noctari princess who thinks I've proposed marriage. That's the spirit, said Marai brightly. And then what? How do I get out of this without causing an interstellar incident? The AI's voice softened to something almost sympathetic. Sometimes, Ambassador Stroud, the path forward isn't about finding an exit strategy. Perhaps you should consider where this unexpected journey might lead. To my diplomatic career being over. Most likely, Jamie muttered, gathering his translation notes. Or to somewhere far more interesting, replied Marai, filling the room with the gentle notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune as Jamie headed for the door. The diplomatic quarters on level 7 were unlike anything Jamie had experienced in his 3 years aboard Sargasso Bloom. While most of the station favored utilitarian design, with touches of various cultural aesthetics, these quarters seemed to exist in a reality of their own. The main living area was a perfect circle, with walls that shifted between deep indigo and midnight blue, occasionally rippling with patterns that reminded Jamie of stars seen through moving water. The ceiling was a dome that displayed what appeared to be a real-time view of nearby space, though Jamie suspected it was enhanced for aesthetic purposes. Stars rarely sparkled quite so poetically in the vacuum of space. Appropriate accommodations have been provided for both human and Noctari physiology, Marai's voice announced as Jamie entered. The temperature and gravity controls can be adjusted to preference, though a compromise setting has been pre-established. Where is she? Jamie asked, noting that the circular room had 3 doorways leading to other chambers. Princess Valeth is in the meditation chamber, preparing for the first phase of evaluation, Marai replied. She has requested 1 hour of solitude before your first formal interaction. Jamie placed his small bag on a low table that seemed to be growing directly from the floor. And what exactly is the first phase of evaluation? A conversational exchange to establish baseline compatibility, said the AI. Nothing too intimidating. Though I should mention that Noctari consider emotional honesty to be the foundation of all meaningful interaction. Emotional honesty, Jamie repeated. They're practically famous for being emotionally impenetrable. A common misconception, Marai corrected. Noctari do not display emotions in the same manner as humans, but they experience them with extraordinary depth and precision. Their cultural emphasis on emotional clarity is why your joke was interpreted as a sincere proposal. Noctari tradition holds that only statements of true emotional significance should be verbalized. Jamie sank onto a couch that contoured itself to his body with unsettling accuracy. So, because I said it out loud, they think I meant it. Essentially, yes. In Naktari culture, to speak of marriage, even in jest, indicates that the concept occupies a place in your emotional landscape that merits vocalization. That's ridiculous, Jamie protested. Humans joke about serious things all the time. Which is precisely why cross-species diplomacy remains challenging, Mirai replied, a hint of professorial tone entering her voice. Your species uses humor as emotional release, often addressing serious matters through jest. Naktari use ritual and formality to provide structure for their intense emotional experiences. Jamie rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. Fine. So I'll just explain that humans joke about everything, and this was a cultural misunderstanding. You may certainly try that approach, Murray said, in a tone that suggested low expectations for its success. However, I should inform you that the Naktari delegation has already filed formal notice of your proposal with the Galactic Council's Cultural Exchange Division. They what? Jamie stood up so quickly that the conforming couch made a startled sound. Standard procedure for Naktari royalty. The proposal has been entered into the diplomatic record and copied to Earth's Interstellar Relations Department. Jamie felt the blood drain from his face. My boss is going to kill me. That seems unlikely, Murray observed. Though I calculate a 87% probability of disciplinary action upon your return to Earth, unless the situation resolves favorably. Favorably? What does that even mean in this context? Before Murray could answer, one of the doorways rippled like liquid mercury, and Princess Valeth stepped through. She had changed from her formal diplomatic attire into what Jamie assumed was casual Naktari dress, a simplified version of their characteristic draped garments, though still made of the same light-absorbing material that seemed to bend shadows around her tall form. Ambassador Stroud, she said, her voice somehow both cool and resonant. I trust you have settled in adequately. Jamie straightened, falling back on his diplomatic training. Yes, thank you, Your Highness. We may dispense with formal titles during the evaluation period, she said, gliding toward a raised platform that formed itself into a seat as she approached. You may address me as Valeth, and I shall call you Jamie, if that is acceptable. That's fine, Jamie replied, watching with fascination as she arranged herself on the seat with a grace that seemed impossible for her long limbs. Then let us begin the first evaluation exchange, she said, folding her 7-fingered hands in her lap. Tell me, Jamie, why did you choose to propose marriage to me? Jamie opened his mouth, prepared to launch into his explanation about human humor and cultural misunderstandings. But something in her obsidian gaze made him pause. There was an intensity there, a focus that made him feel as though his words were being weighed not just for their literal meaning, but for something deeper. I didn't intend it as a proposal, he said carefully. In human culture, we often make statements that aren't meant to be taken literally. Valeth tilted her head slightly. This concept is not unknown to us. We call it shadow speaking, words that dance around the truth rather than illuminating it directly. No, it's not quite like that, Jamie frowned, searching for the right explanation. It's more like we use humor to address things that make us uncomfortable or to release tension. And the concept of union with me causes you discomfort? Jamie felt his face heat up. No, I mean, that's not... He took a deep breath. The negotiations had been going on for 16 hours. I was tired. And sometimes humans say things without thinking when we're tired. Interesting, Valeth said, leaning forward slightly. So you believe your statement emerged from your unconscious mind due to fatigue? Yes, exactly. Among my people, we believe that fatigue merely thins the barrier between conscious thought and true feeling, she said. What emerges in such moments is often more honest, not less. Jamie stared at her, momentarily lost for words. But we need not resolve this question immediately, Valeth continued, settling back in her seat. The evaluation period exists precisely to distinguish between fleeting impulse and genuine compatibility. And how exactly do we do that? Jamie asked, relieved for the slight change in direction. Through shared experience and honest exchange, she replied. We will live as companions for these 7 days, engaging in activities that reveal character, and testing our resonance in various contexts. Resonance? Something flickered across Valeth's face, the first real expression Jamie had seen from her. Yes, that is perhaps the most crucial element of Noctari union. Our species experiences emotional energy as a physical force, capable of being exchanged between compatible individuals. Like empathy. More direct, more essential. For a moment, Valeth seemed to be searching for words, which surprised Jamie. Her command of intergalactic standard language had always seemed flawless. Your species consumes food for sustenance. Mine requires both blood and emotional resonance to thrive. Blood and feelings, Jamie summarized, trying to keep his voice neutral. A crude simplification, but essentially correct. Was that a hint of amusement in her voice? Though I should clarify that the blood requirement is largely symbolic and minimal for modern Noctari. The emotional resonance, however, remains vital. Jamie leaned forward, professional curiosity temporarily overriding his awkward situation. So you literally feed on emotions? Not precisely. We exchange emotional energy, giving as much as we receive. With compatible partners, this creates a self-sustaining cycle that nourishes both. She paused, studying him. Your species experiences something similar, though less direct, in your closest relationships, does it not? Jamie thought about it. I suppose we do talk about relationships being energizing or draining. Yes, you experience it metaphorically. We experience it literally. Valeth rose with fluid grace. Now, our first shared meal has been prepared. Eating together is a universal ritual of bonding across most species. As if on cue, a section of the floor in the center of the room spiraled open, and a table rose into place, already set with an array of dishes that somehow managed to look both alien and appetizing. Murray has selected a menu compatible with both our physiologies, Valeth explained, moving toward the table. Jamie followed, wondering how he'd gone from marathon translation duty to dining with a vampire princess in the span of a few hours. Does Murray get to watch us eat too? I maintain ambient awareness throughout the quarters, Murray's voice replied from nowhere in particular. But I can modulate my presence to provide appropriate privacy. That means yes, Jamie muttered. Indeed, said Valeth, and Jamie could have sworn he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Though in Noctari culture, sharing a meal is considered a social rather than intimate activity. They sat across from each other at the table, which adjusted its height to accommodate their different statures. Jamie noticed that while his place setting included various utensils, Valeth's had only a single implement that resembled a cross between a fork and a straw. For extracting essence, she explained, noticing his gaze. We consume both physical and metaphysical aspects of our food. That's fascinating, Jamie said, and meant it. Despite the absurdity of his situation, the linguist and cultural anthropologist in him couldn't help but be intrigued. Valeth picked up her utensil and delicately inserted it into what appeared to be a pulsing purple fruit. You may ask questions, Jamie. Curiosity is valued in my culture. Okay, Jamie said, picking up his own fork. If emotional resonance is so important to your species, why the formal exterior? Why all the rigid protocols and ceremonies? Valeth extracted something luminescent from the fruit, and Jamie tried not to stare as she consumed it with elegant precision. Structure contains power, she said after a moment. The more profound the emotional capacity, the greater the need for ritual to channel it constructively. Like a riverbank guiding water? Her eyes met his, and for a moment, Jamie felt a strange sensation, as if something had brushed against his consciousness. An apt metaphor, she said. Perhaps you do have some capacity for resonance after all. Jamie wasn't sure if he'd just been complimented or insulted. Is that unusual? For humans? I mean, not unprecedented, but uncommon. Most species experience emotional energy on a spectrum of sensitivity. She gestured with her utensil. Your food grows cold. Jamie realized he'd been so fascinated by their conversation that he'd forgotten to eat. He took a bite of something that tasted surprisingly like herb-roasted chicken, though its texture was more like seafood. So, he said after swallowing, this evaluation period, what exactly are you evaluating? Compatibility, potential, the possibility of sustainable resonance. Valeth's dark eyes studied him. And you, Jamie, what will you be evaluating during our time together? The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought of himself as doing any evaluating. He'd been thinking of the whole situation as something to endure and escape from with minimal diplomatic damage. I guess I'll be trying to understand your culture better, he said finally. And maybe figuring out how to avoid interstellar incidents in the future. Something that might have been disappointment flickered across Valeth's features. There, and gone so quickly that Jamie wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. A practical approach, she said, her voice perfectly even, though limited in scope. The meal continued with conversation about less personal topics, the architecture of Sargasso bloom, the various species currently represented at the diplomatic summit, the challenges of translation across fundamentally different cognitive frameworks. Jamie found himself relaxing despite the bizarre circumstances, falling into the familiar rhythms of cultural exchange that had drawn him to xenolinguistics in the first place. It wasn't until they'd finished eating and the table had receded back into the floor that Jamie realized he'd actually enjoyed himself. Valeth was intelligent, insightful, and possessed of a subtle wit that emerged in unexpected moments. If this had been a normal diplomatic dinner, he would have considered it a success. But it wasn't normal. It was the first night of a 7-day evaluation period, resulting from his accidental proposal to an alien princess. The hour grows late by station time, Valeth said, rising from her seat. Noctari require less rest than humans. But I understand your species needs regular sleep cycles. Yeah, unfortunately we can't just run on blood and feelings, Jamie said, then immediately regretted the flippant comment. But Valeth merely inclined her head. A physiological difference, not a deficiency. Your sleeping chamber has been prepared with appropriate environmental controls. She gestured toward one of the doorways. I will engage in meditative restoration in the adjacent chamber. We shall resume our evaluation in the morning cycle. Right, evaluation, Jamie nodded, suddenly awkward again as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. Good night, then, Valeth. Rest well. Jamie, she replied, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to linger in the air even after she had glided through another doorway, which sealed behind her with a soft whisper. Left alone in the main chamber, Jamie let out a long breath. Murray, are you still there? I maintain ambient awareness throughout the quarters, the AI's voice repeated, this time with a hint of amusement. Of course you do, Jamie muttered. Any advice for navigating this mess? I am programmed to maintain neutrality in diplomatic matters, Murray replied primly. Right. And playing Mozart's Marriage of Figaro when this whole thing started was very neutral. I have no record of such an audio selection in my logs, Murray said, though Jamie could have sworn he heard a smile in her digital voice. Fine. Be useless. Jamie headed toward the door Valeth had indicated. But if I don't survive these 7 days, I'm blaming you in my final report. Noted, Ambassador Stroud. Sleep well. The sleeping chamber turned out to be surprisingly comfortable, with a bed that adjusted to his body even more precisely than the couch had. The walls here were a soothing shade of blue-green that reminded Jamie of Earth's oceans, and the ceiling displayed a gentle starfield that slowly rotated in a way that should have been disorienting, but was somehow calming instead. As Jamie changed into the sleep clothes that had been provided, soft, breathable fabric in neutral tones, he found himself wondering what Valeth was doing in her meditative restoration chamber. Did Noctari dream? Did they sleep at all? Or was their rest period something entirely different? These were the kinds of questions that had drawn him to xenolinguistics and diplomatic service in the first place. The endless fascination of truly alien minds and cultures. If he hadn't been so tired, he might have stayed up making notes for a comparative study. Instead, he climbed into the bed, which molded itself around him with perfect support, and tried to process the day's events. "Computer, dim lights," he said, and the room obliged, leaving only the starfield above to cast a gentle glow. As he drifted toward sleep, Jamie found himself thinking of Valeth's obsidian eyes and the brief moment when he'd felt something, a connection, a resonance pass between them. Was that real, or just his imagination? The last thought that crossed his mind before sleep claimed him was that, for an accidental fiancé, Valeth Nix was unexpectedly intriguing. Morning on Sargasso Bloom was an artificial construct, like everything else on the station. The lighting gradually increased to mimic sunrise, and the environmental systems adjusted temperature and humidity to signal the start of a new cycle. Jamie woke to these changes, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before remembering where he was and why. He groaned and pulled a pillow over his face. "Please, tell me yesterday was a dream. Marai." "I cannot confirm the contents of your dreams, Ambassador Stroud," the AI's voice replied cheerfully. "But if you are referring to your accidental proposal to Princess Valeth, I can assure you that event did occur, and you are indeed in the midst of a Noctari courtship evaluation period." "Thanks. Very helpful," Jamie muttered through the pillow. "You're welcome. Princess Valeth has requested to inform you that the morning meal will be served in 30 minutes, and that afterward, the second phase of evaluation will commence." Jamie removed the pillow and sat up. "What's the second phase?" "Shared activity in a neutral environment, I believe," Murray replied. "Though the specific nature of the activity is traditionally chosen by the evaluating partner, meaning Valeth gets to pick what we do." "Correct." Jamie sighed and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. "Any hints about what she's chosen?" "That would violate neutrality protocols," Murray said primly. "Though I am permitted to suggest appropriate attire. The clothing unit in your chamber has been programmed with options suitable for a range of activities." "Fine," Jamie said, standing up and stretching. "Let's see what Vampire Princess courtship attire looks like." The clothing unit turned out to be a wall panel that, when activated, displayed a holographic array of garments that could be selected with a gesture. Jamie chose something similar to his usual diplomatic uniform, but less formal. Black pants and a gray tunic with subtle blue accents that, he had to admit, complemented his eyes. When he emerged into the main living area, he found Valeth already there. She wore what appeared to be a simplified version of Noctari formal wear, draped layers of that strange, shadow-like material, but with fewer ornamental elements than her diplomatic attire. Her silver-streaked hair was arranged in a less elaborate style, though still elegant. "Good morning," Jamie said, falling back on Earth customs in the absence of knowing the proper Noctari greeting. "The cycle begins," Valeth replied, which Jamie assumed was the Noctari equivalent. "Did you achieve adequate restoration?" "I slept well, thanks," Jamie said, moving toward the center of the room where, once again, a table was rising from the floor. "And you? Did you meditate well?" Something that might have been amusement flickered in Valeth's eyes. "My restoration was satisfactory," Yes. The breakfast spread was as diverse as dinner had been, with options clearly labeled for human and Noctari consumption. Jamie was pleased to find something that resembled coffee among his choices. "After we have eaten," Valeth said as they took their seats, "we will proceed to the hydroponics level for the second evaluation activity." Hydroponics? Jamie hadn't expected that. "We're going to look at plants?" "We will engage with living organisms that are neither human nor Noctari," Valeth explained. "Neutral territory, as it were. The manner in which one interacts with other life forms can be revealing." Jamie nodded, taking a sip of the coffee-like beverage, which tasted better than he'd expected. "Makes sense. On Earth, some people say you can judge a person's character by how they treat servers in restaurants or animals." "A similar principle," Valeth agreed. "Though we will be focusing on plant life rather than fauna or service personnel." "I didn't know Noctari had a special connection to plants," Jamie said, curious despite himself. "All life resonates at certain frequencies," Valeth replied, consuming something that glowed faintly blue. "Plants simply resonate more quietly than most. It requires greater attunement to perceive their energies." "So today you're testing my plant empathy?" "In a manner of speaking," Valeth said, and Jamie could have sworn there was a hint of a smile at the edges of her mouth. "Though it would be more accurate to say I am observing how you approach connection with something fundamentally different from yourself." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them as they finished their meal in companionable silence. The hydroponics level of Sargasso Bloom was a riot of color and life compared to the sleek, minimalist design of most of the station. Curved walls supported hanging gardens of species from dozens of worlds, while central platforms held orderly rows of edible crops that supplied the station's kitchens. The air was humid and rich with earthy scents that made Jamie realize how sterile the recycled atmosphere of the rest of the station really was. "This is impressive," he said as Valeth led him along a winding path between sections. "I've been stationed here for 3 years and never visited this level. Many species become disconnected from organic life when they venture into space," Valeth observed. "It is one of the costs of advancement that is often overlooked." They came to a section that seemed different from the others. Less ordered, more wild. Plants with iridescent leaves stretched toward the specialized lighting arrays, while flowers that seemed to shift and move, even without air currents, bloomed in impossible colors. "This is the Xenobotanical Research Section," Valeth explained. "Species from across the galaxy, many still being studied and catalogued." She stopped before a particular specimen, a plant with silver-blue foliage and delicate, star-shaped flowers that glowed with a soft inner light. "This is a Noctari soul bloom," she said, her voice taking on a different quality than Jamie had heard before, something almost reverent. "They grow only in the ancient temple caves on our homeworld, where the boundaries between physical and emotional energy are thinnest." Jamie studied the plant with newfound interest. "It's beautiful." "It is also extremely sensitive to emotional resonance," Valeth continued. "In the presence of compatible energies, it displays certain characteristics." As if on cue, one of the glowing flowers turned slightly in their direction, like a curious face looking up. "Did it just move?" Jamie asked, leaning closer. "It responds to attention," Valeth confirmed, "particularly to emotional states that align with its own resonant frequency." "Plants have emotional states?" "Not as you understand them," Valeth said. "But, yes, in a fundamental sense, all living things exist on a spectrum of awareness, with different types of consciousness expressing themselves in different ways." Jamie watched, fascinated, as another flower seemed to bend toward them. "What's it responding to right now?" "Curiosity," Valeth said. "Both yours and mine." She reached out one 7-fingered hand, not quite touching the plant but hovering near it. The flowers nearest her hand began to pulse with a slightly brighter light. "The soul bloom shares a deep connection with my species," she explained. We evolved together over millions of years, each influencing the other's development. In ancient times, it was believed that the flowers contained the spirits of our ancestors, guiding us from beyond. "Do you believe that?" Jamie asked, genuinely curious. Valeth considered the question. "I believe that consciousness takes many forms, and that the boundaries we perceive between different types of beings are often arbitrary. Whether the connection is spiritual or merely biological is perhaps less important than the fact that the connection exists." Jamie nodded, finding himself unexpectedly moved by her answer. It was the most personal thing he'd heard her say since this strange situation began. "Would you like to try?" Valeth asked, gesturing toward the plant. "Try what?" "Connecting with it," she said. "Hold your hand near, but not touching, and focus your attention on the flowers." Feeling slightly self-conscious but curious, Jamie extended his hand as Valeth had done. For several seconds, nothing happened, and he felt a twinge of disappointment. "It helps to clear your mind of expectations," Valeth suggested, her voice softer than usual. "Simply be present with it." Jamie took a deep breath and tried to empty his mind of the chattering thoughts about his diplomatic predicament, about how bizarre the situation was, about what his colleagues would say if they could see him now. He focused instead on the delicate beauty of the plant, the gentle glow of its flowers, the subtle patterns in its silver-blue leaves. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the flower nearest his hand began to brighten. The glow intensified, spreading to adjacent blooms, until several flowers were pulsing with a luminescence that seemed to match the rhythm of his heartbeat. "It's responding," he whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break the connection. "Yes," Valeth said, and there was something in her voice that made Jamie look up. She was watching him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "It finds your energy compatible." "Is that unusual?" "For a non-Noctari?" She nodded. "Quite rare. The soul bloom typically responds only to our species." Jamie looked back at the plant, where the glowing had begun to spread to even more flowers. "Maybe it's because I work with languages. Translation requires a kind of empathy, the ability to feel your way into different patterns of thought." "Perhaps," Valeth agreed. "Or perhaps there is something unique about your particular resonance." Before Jamie could ask what she meant by that, the flowers suddenly flared with a brilliant light, then settled back to their normal glow as a group of researchers entered the far end of the xenobotanical section, chatting loudly among themselves. "The moment passes," Valeth said, straightening, "but it was illuminating." Jamie wasn't sure if she meant literally or figuratively, but he nodded anyway, strangely reluctant to move away from the soul bloom. "Thank you for showing me this. It's not what I expected from a courtship evaluation." "What did you expect?" Valeth asked, as they began walking back toward the main path. Jamie considered the question. "I don't know. Something more formal. I guess tests or interviews or something." "Those approaches measure surface compatibility," Valeth said. "I am more interested in deeper resonance." As they continued their tour of the hydroponics level, Jamie found himself increasingly fascinated by Valeth's knowledge of xenobotany and her perspective on the interconnectedness of life forms. What had started as an awkward obligation was becoming genuinely engaging. By the time they returned to their quarters for the midday meal, Jamie had almost forgotten the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Almost. "The second phase of evaluation has been productive," Valeth said as they sat down to eat. "You show unexpected capacity for connection." "Thanks, I think," Jamie replied, unsure whether to take her assessment as a compliment or merely an observation. "It is a positive attribute," she clarified, as if sensing his uncertainty. Many species maintain rigid boundaries between themselves and others, particularly those who appear different. "Well, in my line of work, finding connections across differences is Kind of the whole point, Jamie said, taking a bite of something that tasted like spiced quinoa. If you can't find common ground, translation becomes technically accurate, but meaningless. Valeth tilted her head slightly, studying him. You view your work as more than mere linguistic conversion. Of course, Jamie said, warming to the topic. Anyone can program an AI to swap words from one language to another. The art is in preserving meaning, context, emotional resonance. He stopped, realizing he'd used her terminology. Precisely, Valeth said, and there was definitely a smile playing at the corners of her mouth now. You understand resonance better than you realize, Jamie Stroud. The way she said his name sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. For a moment, he found himself wondering what it would be like to actually court someone like Valeth. Brilliant, composed, with depths of understanding that seemed to unfold layer by layer. Then he remembered that she was an alien vampire princess who thought he'd proposed marriage because of a throwaway joke, and reality reasserted itself with uncomfortable clarity. The third phase of evaluation will begin after the rest period, Valeth said, apparently unaware of his internal conflict. It traditionally involves creative expression. Creative expression, Jamie repeated, uncertain. Each participant shares something created by their own mind and hands. Valeth explained. Art, music, poetry. The form is less important than the authentic expression of self. Jamie felt a twinge of panic. I'm not really an artist. The technical skill is irrelevant, Valeth assured him. The purpose is to reveal aspects of oneself that might not emerge through conversation alone. Right, Jamie said weakly. No pressure. Valeth's dark eyes studied him. You are uncomfortable with this phase. A little, Jamie admitted. In human culture, creative expression can feel very vulnerable. That is precisely why it is valuable, Valeth said. But rest assured, there is no judgment of quality in this exchange, only an appreciation of what is shared. After the meal, they retired to their respective chambers for the afternoon rest period. Jamie lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling's star display, and trying to think of what he could possibly create that wouldn't be completely embarrassing. He was a linguist, not an artist. His attempts at drawing looked like they'd been done by a child. He couldn't play any instruments. Poetry. The thought made him cringe. Murray, he called softly. Yes, Ambassador Stroud, the AI's voice replied at a matching volume. What do people usually do for this creative expression phase? That varies widely by species and individual, Murray replied. Some sing, some dance, some create visual art. I've observed everything from elaborate architectural models to simple storytelling. What do Noctari typically do? Noctari creative expression often involves a form of energy manipulation that's difficult to translate into human terms, Murray said. However, Princess Valeth is well versed in cross-cultural diplomacy. She will likely choose a form that's comprehensible to you. That wasn't particularly reassuring. Jamie sighed and closed his eyes, trying to think of something, anything, he could create that wouldn't make him look like a complete fool. As he drifted into a light doze, a memory surfaced, himself as a teenager, sitting on his grandmother's porch in summer twilight, idly strumming her old guitar and singing along to pop songs. He hadn't been great, but his grandmother had always said he had a pleasant voice when he wasn't trying too hard. When the rest period ended and Jamie emerged from his chamber, he found Valeth already waiting in the main room. She stood near the center, where the floor had reconfigured into a shallow circular depression ringed with cushioned seating. The traditional space for sharing, she explained, gesturing for him to join her. Will you go first, or shall I? Jamie swallowed nervously. You can go first, please. Valeth nodded and moved to stand in the center of the circle. What I will share is a simplified version of a Noctari emotional composition. Among my people, this would involve direct energy manipulation, but I have adapted it to be perceptible to human senses." She raised her seven-fingered hands, and the lighting in the room dimmed. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Jamie noticed a faint shimmer in the air around her, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer grew more pronounced, taking on colors, first deep blues and purples, then flashes of silver and gold. The colors moved in patterns that reminded Jamie of flowing water or billowing smoke, but with a structure that suggested purpose rather than randomness. As the display continued, Jamie began to feel something. Not just see it, but feel it. A sense of longing so profound, it made his chest ache. Wonder at the vastness of space and time. The bittersweet recognition of beauty in impermanence. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were visceral sensations washing over him in waves that corresponded to the shifting patterns of light around Valeth. Somehow, she was making him feel her emotions directly. The display reached a crescendo of interweaving colors and sensations before gradually subsiding, leaving only a soft, warm glow that slowly faded to normal lighting. Valeth lowered her hands and opened eyes that Jamie hadn't even noticed she'd closed. "That was—" Jamie struggled to find words. "Incredible. How did you do that?" "It is a basic form of energy projection," Valeth said, though her voice sounded slightly strained, as if the performance had cost her some effort. "A fundamental skill for Noctari, though rarely shared with other species." "I've never experienced anything like it," Jamie said honestly. "It was like feeling someone else's emotions directly, without words getting in the way." "That is the essence of true communication," Valeth said, moving to take a seat on the cushioned rim. "Words are symbolic representations. They approximate meaning, but rarely capture it completely." Jamie nodded, still processing the experience. "It makes translation seem pretty inadequate in comparison." "Not inadequate," Valeth corrected gently. "Simply different. Words build bridges where direct resonance cannot reach." She gestured to the center of the circle. "And now, it is your turn to share." Jamie took a deep breath and stood up. "I'm afraid what I have to offer isn't nearly as impressive." "Comparison is not the purpose," Valeth reminded him. "Only authentic expression." "Right." Jamie moved to the center of the circle, feeling incredibly self-conscious. On Earth, one of our oldest forms of expression is music, specifically singing. I'm not particularly skilled, but it's something that's always meant a lot to me." He cleared his throat, suddenly wishing he'd chosen anything else. But it was too late to back out now. "This is a song my grandmother used to sing," he explained. "It's about finding connection across distance." And then, before he could lose his nerve, Jamie began to sing. It was an old folk song, one that had been passed down through generations in his family. The melody was simple, the lyrics speaking of stars as guideposts for lost travelers and as symbols of enduring connection between separated loved ones. His voice wavered at first, uncertain, but grew stronger as he continued. He closed his eyes after the first verse, focusing on the memory of his grandmother singing on summer evenings, on the feeling the song had always evoked in him, a mixture of melancholy and hope, of recognition that distance was both a reality and an illusion. When the final note faded, Jamie kept his eyes closed for a moment longer, half afraid to see Valeth's reaction. When he finally looked up, he was startled by what he saw. Valeth sat perfectly still, her obsidian eyes wide, a faint violet flush spreading across her cheekbones. More startling still were the tiny points of light that seemed to hover in the air around her, like miniature versions of the soul bloom's flowers. "Valeth," Jamie said uncertainly, "are you okay?" She blinked, and the lights vanished. Yes." Her voice sounded different, less controlled than he'd ever heard it. "Your song was unexpected." "I'm sorry if it wasn't what you were hoping for," Jamie said, moving back to his seat. "No," Valeth said quickly. "You misunderstand. It was—" She paused, seeming to search for words, which was so unlike her usual precise speech that Jamie grew concerned. "Murray," he called. "Is something wrong with Princess Valeth?" "Princess Valeth is experiencing an elevated emotional resonance state," Murray's voice replied. "It is uncommon, but not dangerous. Similar to what humans might call being moved by a performance, though the physiological response is more pronounced in Noctari physiology." "I apologize for alarming you," Valeth said, her voice returning to something closer to its usual cadence. "Your song created a resonant frequency that triggered an involuntary response. It has been some time since I experienced such a direct connection." "So, you liked it?" Jamie asked, still uncertain. The violet flush deepened slightly on Valeth's cheeks. "Very much so. The emotional honesty in your performance was powerful." "Oh," Jamie said, feeling oddly pleased. "Thanks. The third phase has been most informative," Valeth said, rising from her seat with her usual grace, though Jamie thought he detected a slight unsteadiness. "I must meditate to process this experience. We will continue the evaluation tomorrow." Before Jamie could respond, she had glided to her chamber doorway and disappeared through it, leaving him alone in the circle. "What just happened?" he asked the empty room. "A significant development in your courtship evaluation." Murray's voice replied with what sounded suspiciously like smugness. "Can you be more specific?" "That would violate neutrality protocols," the AI said primly. "However, I am permitted to observe that Princess Valeth's reaction was statistically unusual for Noctari-human interactions." Meaning, Ambassador Stroud, that your accidental proposal may have become considerably more complicated." Jamie groaned and flopped back onto the cushions. "Great, just great." But despite his words, he found himself replaying the moment in his mind, the look of wonder on Valeth's face, the strange lights that had appeared around her, the uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice afterward. For someone who had spent his career studying communication across seemingly insurmountable differences, there was something undeniably fascinating about having reached Valeth on such a fundamental level, even accidentally. The question was, what did it mean for their bizarre situation? And more importantly, what did it mean for him that he wasn't entirely opposed to finding out? On the fourth day of the evaluation period, Jamie woke to find a formal notification glowing on the wall of his sleeping chamber. It was from the station's diplomatic affairs office, requesting his presence at an emergency meeting regarding recent developments in human-Noctari relations. "Murray," he called, sitting up quickly. "What's this about?" "Several representatives from the Galactic Council's Cultural Exchange Division have arrived at the station," the AI explained. "They have expressed concerns about the ongoing courtship evaluation between you and Princess Valeth." Jamie felt his stomach sink. "What kind of concerns?" "They cite Emotion Clause 92B of the Interstellar Relations Charter, which prohibits personal emotional attachments from influencing diplomatic negotiations." "But the trade talks were suspended for the evaluation period," Jamie protested. "We haven't been negotiating anything." "Technically correct," Murray acknowledged, "but the clause also covers potential future influence. The representatives are concerned that regardless of the evaluation's outcome, the personal nature of your interaction with Princess Valeth may compromise the neutrality of future negotiations." Jamie rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. "So what do they want?" "The meeting will address that question," Murray replied. "Princess Valeth has received a similar summons." "Where is she now?" "Already attending a preliminary consultation with the Noctari delegation." Jamie sighed and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. "When is this meeting?" "In 1 hour. Appropriate attire has been highlighted in the clothing unit." The indicated outfit was Jamie's most formal diplomatic uniform, which didn't bode well for the nature of the meeting. As he dressed, he tried to process the situation logically. On one hand, this might be his opportunity to end the accidental engagement without causing offense, if the Galactic Council itself intervened. Neither he nor Valeth could be blamed for complying with a higher authority. On the other hand, the thought of bureaucrats terminating their evaluation based on some obscure regulation felt strangely disappointing. Despite the awkward circumstances, the past 3 days with Valeth had been fascinating, challenging, unlike any cultural exchange he'd experienced in his career. And if he was being completely honest with himself, there was something about Valeth that had begun to intrigue him on a personal level. The glimpses of emotion beneath her composed exterior, her profound insights into connection and communication, the way her obsidian eyes had widened when he sang. Jamie shook his head, trying to clear it. This was ridiculous. She was an alien vampire princess. He was a human diplomat who'd made a stupid joke. Whatever connection he thought he might be feeling was probably just some weird side effect of Noctari emotional resonance abilities. Wasn't it? The emergency meeting was held in one of the station's most formal chambers. A hexagonal room with high ceilings and walls that displayed a real-time view of the surrounding space. The effect was both beautiful and intimidating, a constant reminder of the vastness beyond the station and the fragility of the diplomatic connections being forged within it. When Jamie arrived, he found representatives from at least 6 different species already seated around the central table. Valeth was there, back in her full formal regalia, looking every inch the royal diplomat. She acknowledged him with a slight inclination of her head, but gave no other indication of their past 3 days of personal interaction. "Ambassador Stroud," said a tall, willowy being with iridescent skin that Jamie recognized as Dr. Alara Thalos, the station's diplomatic coordinator. "Please be seated. We are addressing a matter of some delicacy." Jamie took the indicated seat, directly across from Valeth. "I understand there are concerns about the courtship evaluation." "Indeed," said another figure, a Meridian representative whose name Jamie couldn't recall. Their crystalline features caught the light as they turned toward him. "The emotion clause exists for good reason. Ambassador, personal attachments, cloud judgment, and compromised diplomatic neutrality. The evaluation period is a cultural tradition," Valeth said, her voice cool and formal. "It does not presuppose any outcome, nor does it guarantee a permanent union. Yet it creates the appearance of personal involvement," countered a third representative. This one, a Vox collective. 3 small, identical beings that always spoke in perfect unison. The mere suggestion of emotional entanglement between key representatives undermines confidence in the negotiation process. Jamie glanced at Valeth, trying to gauge her reaction, but her expression remained impassive. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked, addressing the table at large. Dr. Thalos steepled her long fingers. "The Cultural Exchange Division recommends immediate termination of the evaluation period. Ambassador Stroud would be temporarily reassigned to another diplomatic mission, while Princess Valeth continues the trade negotiations with a different human representative." "That seems excessive," Jamie said, surprised by the force of his own objection. "The evaluation is a structured cultural exchange. Terminating it prematurely could be interpreted as disrespect for Noctari traditions." "A valid concern," Valeth acknowledged, her eyes meeting his briefly. "However, if the Council deems it necessary—" "It is more than necessary," interrupted the Meridian representative. "It is essential. We have received reports of unusual energy signatures emanating from your shared quarters. Specifically, an event registered yesterday that matches patterns consistent with Noctari emotional resonance phenomena." Jamie felt heat rise to his face as he realized they were referring to Valeth's reaction to his singing. "The private interactions of evaluation participants are not subject to monitoring or regulation," Valeth said, a hint of sharpness entering her voice. "They are when they generate energy readings that disrupt station systems," countered the Vox collective. "The resonance spike triggered 3 separate security protocols. That was an unintended consequence, Valeth said, the violet flush Jamie had seen before faintly visible on her cheekbones. And a temporary anomaly. Regardless, said Dr. Thalos, the incident raises concerns about the stability of continuing this arrangement. The Council recommends— If I may, Jamie interrupted, surprising himself again. I'd like to formally contest this recommendation. A murmur ran around the table. Valeth's eyes widened slightly, the Noctari equivalent of obvious shock. On what grounds? Asked the Meridian representative. Jamie took a deep breath, thinking quickly. Article 7 of the Interstellar Cultural Protection Act guarantees the right of all recognized species to practice their traditional customs without interference, so long as those customs do not cause harm to non-consenting parties. You are invoking cultural protection, the Vox Collective's tone conveyed disbelief. For a tradition you became involved in through miscommunication? The initial circumstances are irrelevant, Jamie argued, warming to his position. Once the evaluation began, it became a formal cultural exchange protected under Article 7. Terminating it without due process would establish a troubling precedent for council intervention in cultural practices. Dr. Thalos looked thoughtful. You make an interesting legal argument, Ambassador Stroud. However, the emotion clause only applies if there is evidence that emotional entanglement has compromised diplomatic function. Jamie countered. Since the trade negotiations were formally suspended for the duration of the evaluation period, no such compromise has occurred. And what of future negotiations? Asked the Meridian. Future concerns are speculative and cannot be the basis for present intervention, Jamie said, falling back on his diplomatic training. If, after the evaluation concludes, there is concrete evidence of compromise, that would be the appropriate time to invoke the clause. The representatives exchanged glances. Valeth sat perfectly still, but Jamie thought he detected a hint of something like admiration in her obsidian gaze. Your argument has merit, Dr. Thalos conceded after a moment. However, the energy disruption remains a practical concern. Then perhaps a compromise, Valeth suggested, her voice perfectly measured. The evaluation will continue, but with additional safeguards to contain any potential resonance phenomena. What kind of safeguards? Asked the Vox Collective. Noctari resonance dampeners can be installed in our quarters, Valeth said. They will ensure that any energy fluctuations remain contained without interfering with the evaluation process itself. Dr. Thalos considered this. That could be acceptable, provided the dampeners are monitored by neutral parties. Of course, Valeth agreed smoothly. And, added the Meridian representative, we will require daily reports on the progress of the evaluation to ensure transparency. Jamie fought to keep his expression neutral. The idea of filing daily reports about his personal interactions with Valeth was awkward at best, but it seemed a small price to pay for continuing the evaluation, which, he realized with some surprise, he genuinely wanted to do. That can be arranged, he said. Will that satisfy the Council's concerns? After some further discussion and minor adjustments to the terms, the representatives finally agreed to allow the evaluation to continue under the enhanced monitoring conditions. As the meeting concluded, Jamie caught Valeth's eye across the table. Thank you for your advocacy, Ambassador Stroud, she said formally. But there was something in her tone that suggested more personal gratitude. It was the right thing to do, Jamie replied simply. As they left the chamber together, Valeth spoke in a lower voice that wouldn't carry to the other departing representatives. Your invocation of Article 7 was unexpected. I surprised myself, Jamie admitted, but it felt wrong to let them end this based on regulations and fears. Indeed. Valeth was silent for a moment as they walked. May I ask why you chose to contest their recommendation? It would have provided an easy resolution to our unusual situation. Jamie considered the question carefully. I guess I felt like we started something, and we should finish it properly. not let bureaucracy dictate the outcome. Valeth studied him, with those obsidian eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to reveal. A very Noctari perspective. Ambassador. Jamie, he corrected. If we're going to have resonance dampeners and file daily reports about our courtship evaluation, I think we can stick with first names. The corner of Valeth's mouth curved upward in the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her in public. Jamie. Then, as they returned to their quarters, Jamie found himself wondering exactly what he'd gotten himself into by fighting to continue this strange arrangement. But watching Valeth walk beside him, her usual grace somehow more relaxed than when they'd first begun this journey, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Whatever was happening between them, cultural exchange, diplomatic incident, or something else entirely, deserved the chance to reach its natural conclusion. When they arrived at their quarters, they found Mirai overseeing the installation of sleek, silver devices in each corner of the main room. The resonance dampeners are being calibrated, the AI informed them. They will activate automatically if energy levels exceed predetermined thresholds. Thank you, Mirai, Valeth said, moving to inspect one of the devices. These appear to be the latest model. Only the best for our most interesting diplomatic incident, Mirai replied with unmistakable amusement. The Cultural Exchange Division has spared no expense in their attempt to contain whatever is happening between you two. Jamie felt his face warm. Nothing is happening. We're just following through with a cultural tradition. Of course, Mirai said, in a tone that suggested she didn't believe him for a second. And your impassioned legal defense of that tradition was purely professional. It was, Jamie insisted, though even to his own ears, the protest sounded weak. Valeth, who had been examining the dampeners, turned to face them. The devices are properly configured. They will not interfere with the evaluation itself, only prevent any resonance effects from expanding beyond these quarters. So what happens now? Jamie asked. Do we just continue as before? The fourth phase of evaluation traditionally involves shared challenge, Valeth explained. A task that requires cooperation and mutual trust. What kind of task? Normally, something physically demanding or potentially dangerous, Valeth said. However, given the station's safety protocols and our current monitored status, we will need to adapt the tradition. I may have a suggestion, Mirai interjected. The station is currently experiencing navigation system fluctuations in the maintenance tunnels of Section 14. Nothing dangerous, but the diagnostic team is short-handed. A two-person team with different perceptual abilities might be ideal for identifying the source of the problem. Valeth tilted her head. Considering, Noctari visual spectrum extends beyond human range, particularly in low-light conditions, and human intuitive problem-solving is well documented. Exactly, Mirai said. You would be performing a genuine service to the station while engaging in a task that requires complementary abilities and mutual reliance. Jamie nodded slowly. That actually sounds perfect. I concur, Valeth said. When can we begin? After your midday meal, Mirai replied. Appropriate attire and equipment will be provided. As they ate lunch, Jamie found himself curious about the traditional form of the fourth evaluation phase. So what would we be doing if we were on your homeworld? He asked Valeth. You mentioned something physically demanding or dangerous? Yes, Valeth confirmed. Typically, the pairs would be sent into the Cave of Echoes, a natural formation with unusual acoustic properties that create disorienting effects. They must find their way out together, relying on each other's strengths. That sounds intense, Jamie said, trying to imagine it. It is meant to be, Valeth said. Union between Noctari is not entered into lightly. We believe that true compatibility reveals itself most clearly under pressure. I guess humans have similar ideas, Jamie reflected. There's an old saying that you don't really know someone until you've traveled with them or gone through a crisis together. A wise observation, Valeth said. Comfortable circumstances reveal only comfortable aspects of character. After they finished eating, they changed into the provided maintenance jumpsuits, practical garments with multiple pockets and reinforced knees and elbows. Jamie's was standard issue, but Valeth's had been modified to accommodate her taller frame and different proportions. "You look different," Jamie observed as they met in the main room. It wasn't just the clothing. Valeth had also simplified her hairstyle, pulling the silver-streaked strands back into a single, practical braid. "As do you," she replied, her eyes taking in his transformed appearance. The absence of formal signifiers changes perception. "That's a diplomatic way of saying I look scruffy in a jumpsuit," Jamie said with a grin. "Not at all," Valeth countered. "I was observing that without the cultural markers of our respective positions, we appear more as individuals than as representatives." Before Jamie could respond to that unexpectedly thoughtful comment, Murray materialized between them. "Your equipment is ready," the AI announced, indicating a table that had risen from the floor, bearing various tools and devices. "You'll each need a standard diagnostic scanner, emergency beacon, and communications unit. Additionally, I've included specialized equipment based on your physiological differences." Jamie examined the gear, finding a headlamp designed for human visual ranges and a tablet with station schematics. Valeth was provided with what appeared to be a sensory enhancement band that fit around her wrist. "The navigation system fluctuations are intermittent," Murray explained, as they equipped themselves, "which has made them difficult to pinpoint. Your task is to locate the source of the disruption and, if possible, identify the cause. Repair teams will handle the actual fix once you've found the problem." "Understood," Valeth said, adjusting her wristband. "The maintenance tunnels are perfectly safe," Murray assured them. "But they are narrow in places and minimally lit to conserve energy. Some sections may require crawling rather than walking." "Great," Jamie muttered. "Cramped, dark spaces. My favorite. An opportunity to overcome discomfort through shared purpose," Valeth observed. And Jamie couldn't tell if she was teasing him or offering genuine philosophical perspective. Maybe both. Murray led them to a service elevator that took them deep into the station's infrastructure levels. Unlike the polished aesthetic design of the public and diplomatic areas, these sections were purely functional, a maze of conduits, pipes, and narrow passageways that reminded Jamie that for all its beauty, Sargasso Bloom was ultimately a machine, keeping its inhabitants alive in the vacuum of space. "This is where I leave you," Murray said, as the elevator doors opened onto a dimly lit corridor. "Follow the schematic to Section 14. Your communications units will allow you to contact me if necessary, but be aware that signal strength varies in the maintenance tunnels." "We'll be fine," Jamie said with more confidence than he felt. The corridor ahead looked like something from an old submarine, all exposed pipes and metal grating. "Indeed you will," Murray agreed. "And, may I say, you make a surprisingly complementary team." The elevator doors closed before either of them could respond to that comment. "Shall we proceed?" Valeth asked, examining the schematic on her tablet. "Lead the way," Jamie said, switching on his headlamp. The journey through the maintenance tunnels was more challenging than Jamie had anticipated. The passageways twisted and branched in complex patterns, following the organic design of the station itself. In some places, they walked comfortably side by side. In others, they had to squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for Valeth's tall frame. "These tunnels appear to mimic natural systems," Valeth observed, as they navigated a particularly winding section. "Like vascular structures in living organisms." "I was thinking the same thing," Jamie said, ducking under a low-hanging conduit. "I've heard the station's designers were inspired by biological models. Something about self-healing capabilities." "An elegant approach," Valeth said. "Form following function, yet informed by evolved efficiency." They continued in companionable silence for a while, each focused on navigating the increasingly complex network of tunnels. Jamie was surprised by how comfortable it felt, working alongside Valeth in this non-diplomatic context. Without the formal trappings of their respective positions, their interaction felt more natural. Two individuals with complementary skills tackling a shared challenge. As they approached Section 14, the lighting grew even dimmer, and Jamie's headlamp became their primary illumination source. "The navigation fluctuations should be detectable in this vicinity," Valeth said, consulting her tablet. "My scanner is picking up unusual energy patterns." Jamie checked his own device. "Nothing on mine yet. What are you seeing?" "Rhythmic pulses of electromagnetic energy," Valeth replied, her obsidian eyes reflecting the glow of her scanner. "Not consistent with standard systems." "Can you pinpoint the source?" Valeth turned slowly, her scanner extended. "It appears to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously, as if reflected or refracted." Jamie frowned, thinking. That could explain why the diagnostic team hasn't been able to locate it, if the signal is bouncing around these metal tunnels. "Indeed," Valeth agreed. "We need to identify the original source, not the reflections." They proceeded more carefully now, stopping at each junction to take readings. Jamie's scanner had begun picking up faint traces of the same energy pattern Valeth had detected, but the signals remained frustratingly inconsistent. "Wait," Jamie said suddenly, as a thought occurred to him. "What if we're thinking about this wrong? Instead of chasing the strongest signal, let's look for a pattern in how they're distributed." Valeth considered this. "A logical approach. If we map the relative strength at multiple points, we might be able to triangulate the origin." They split up slightly, each taking readings from different positions while staying within sight of each other. After several minutes, they compared results. "There's definitely a pattern," Jamie said, studying the combined data on his tablet. "But it's not pointing to any single location. It's more like a wave," Valeth finished for him. "The energy is propagating in waves throughout this section of the station." Jamie nodded excitedly. "Which means the source could be generating a specific frequency that's causing resonance in the navigation systems." "Resonance," Valeth repeated, giving him a look that Jamie couldn't quite interpret. "An apt observation." They continued their investigation with renewed focus, now looking for anything that might be generating the frequency they'd identified. The search led them deeper into the maintenance tunnels, to areas that seemed rarely visited, even by the station's technical staff. "This section doesn't match the schematic," Jamie said, frowning at his tablet as they entered a circular chamber with multiple conduits running through it. "An undocumented modification, perhaps," Valeth suggested, her scanner beeping more insistently. "The signal is strongest here." Jamie played his headlamp around the chamber, looking for anything unusual. The light caught something reflective in a corner, a small device attached to one of the main conduits. "There," he said, pointing. "That doesn't look like standard station equipment." They approached carefully. The device was about the size of Jamie's palm, with a crystalline structure that pulsed with a faint blue light. "This is not human technology," Valeth observed, her scanner hovering near it without touching. "Nor is it Noctari. The energy signature is unlike anything in my database." "Mine either," Jamie confirmed, checking his readings. "But it's definitely the source of our interference." Valeth studied the device with intense focus. "The design suggests Etherian origin, but the energy pattern is inconsistent with their known technology." "Could it be some kind of hybrid?" Jamie suggested. "Or an experimental prototype?" "Possibly," Valeth agreed. "The question is how it came to be installed in a restricted area of the station, and for what purpose." Jamie activated his communication unit. "Murray, we've found something unusual in Section 14. Some kind of non-standard device connected to the main conduits." There was a burst of static. Then Murray's voice came through, faint but audible. "Can you describe it?" Jamie did his best to detail what they were seeing, while Valeth continued scanning the device from different angles. "Interesting," Murray's voice replied. "That section was scheduled for routine maintenance by an external contractor 3 weeks ago. It seems our mystery device may have been installed then." "It's generating a frequency that's interfering with the navigation systems," Jamie explained. "Should we remove it?" "Negative," Murray said firmly. "If it's what I suspect, improper removal could trigger security countermeasures. I'm sending a specialized team to your location. Please maintain a safe distance until they arrive." "Understood," Jamie acknowledged, then turned to Valeth. "Looks like we've found our problem, but we need to wait for the experts to handle it." Valeth nodded, but continued studying the device with evident fascination. "The design is elegant. See how the crystalline structure channels the energy in specific patterns? Almost like a living circulatory system." Jamie moved closer to get a better look, his shoulder brushing against Valeth's arm as they both leaned in. The contact was brief, but he felt a distinct tingle where their bodies had touched, like a static shock, but warmer somehow. Valeth straightened suddenly, taking a step back. "We should maintain the recommended safe distance." "Right," Jamie agreed, though he found himself oddly reluctant to move away, both from the device and from Valeth. "How long do you think until the team gets here?" "Approximately 20 minutes, based on standard response protocols," Valeth replied, her voice carefully neutral. They retreated to the entrance of the chamber, keeping the device in sight while maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance. As they waited, an awkward silence fell between them, the first since they'd begun their mission in the tunnels. "So," Jamie said finally, "would you say we passed the shared challenge phase of the evaluation?" Valeth considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "We identified the problem through complementary observation and logical deduction. We communicated effectively and supported each other's hypotheses. By traditional standards, yes, I would consider this a successful completion of the 4th phase." "Cool," Jamie said, oddly pleased by her assessment. "What comes next? Assuming the Council doesn't find another reason to try to shut us down." "The 5th phase is traditionally the most significant," Valeth said. "It involves deep resonance testing, a direct assessment of emotional and energetic compatibility." "That sounds intense," Jamie said, trying to imagine what that might entail. "How does it usually work?" "Among Noctari, it involves a direct sharing of emotional energy," Valeth explained. "A mutual opening of inner barriers that normally separate individual consciousness. It is intimate." Jamie swallowed. "And how would that work with a human?" "I don't exactly have Noctari abilities." "That remains to be seen," Valeth said, her obsidian eyes studying him with an intensity that made his skin tingle. "Your reaction to my creative expression and my response to your singing suggests some level of resonance compatibility may exist. Unprecedented, but not impossible." Before Jamie could respond, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the tunnels. The technical team had arrived more quickly than expected. The specialists, a mixed group of humans and Meridians, quickly cordoned off the area around the mysterious device and began setting up equipment of their own. A tall human woman, who introduced herself as Chief Technical Officer Lara Chen, approached them. "Good work locating this," she said, examining their scanner readings. "It appears to be a sophisticated monitoring device, not dangerous in itself, but definitely not authorized. We'll need to document everything before removal." "Any idea who might have placed it here?" Jamie asked. "Too early to say," Chen replied. "But, given its location near critical navigation systems, industrial espionage seems likely, or possibly preliminary reconnaissance for something more serious." Valeth's expression remained impassive, but Jamie noticed a slight tension in her posture. "The implications for station security are concerning." "Indeed," Chen agreed. "But Thanks to your discovery, we can address the issue before any real damage occurred." She glanced between them with curious eyes. An unusual pairing for maintenance diagnostics. A human diplomat and a Noctari princess. Jamie felt his face warm. "We're participating in a cultural exchange program." "Of course," Chen said, not quite hiding her skepticism. "Well, whatever the reason, your collaboration proved effective. You're free to return to your quarters now. We'll handle things from here." As they made their way back through the maintenance tunnels, Jamie found himself acutely aware of Valeth's presence beside him. The conversation about the fifth phase of evaluation had raised questions he wasn't sure he was ready to consider. "You're unusually quiet," Valeth observed as they neared the service elevator. "Just thinking about what you said earlier," Jamie admitted. "About the deep resonance testing. It sounds like something that would be difficult, maybe impossible, between different species." Valeth was silent for a moment before responding. "Traditionally, yes, Noctari resonance evolved as an intraspecies bond. But evolution is not static, and neither are cultural practices. Meaning that adaptation is the essence of survival," she said. "Both biological and cultural. Perhaps this unusual situation presents an opportunity to explore new forms of connection." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, doors sliding open to welcome them back to the more civilized parts of the station. As they stepped inside, Jamie found himself wondering if Valeth was speaking purely academically, or if there was something more personal behind her words. Either way, he realized with some surprise that he was genuinely curious to discover what the fifth phase might reveal. When they returned to their quarters, they found that the resonance dampeners had been adjusted, now emitting a soft, barely perceptible hum. "The technical division has modified the dampeners based on the readings from our shared creative expression," Mirai explained as they entered. "They should now be calibrated to allow normal evaluation activities while preventing any station-wide effects." "Thank you, Mirai," Valeth said, removing her equipment belt and placing it on a storage shelf that extended from the wall at her approach. "I trust your maintenance expedition was productive," the AI inquired, a hint of knowing amusement in her digital voice. "We found the source of the navigation fluctuations," Jamie confirmed, following Valeth's example and shedding his maintenance gear. "Some kind of unauthorized monitoring device." "Indeed," Mirai said. "The security division is quite interested in how it came to be installed, but that's no longer your concern. Your completion of the fourth evaluation phase has been officially logged, with commendations for effective cross-species collaboration." "Commendations," Jamie repeated, surprised. "From whom?" "The Cultural Exchange Division," Mirai replied. "It seems your impassioned defense of the evaluation process, followed by your successful joint problem-solving, has shifted some opinions on the Council." Valeth tilted her head slightly. "Interesting. The very representatives who sought to terminate our evaluation are now acknowledging its potential value. Bureaucratic minds are often resistant to change until presented with measurable results," Mirai observed. "Your partnership has provided such results." "Partnership?" The word lingered in Jamie's mind as he cleaned up after their expedition. Was that what this was becoming? Something more than an accidental cultural misunderstanding or a diplomatic obligation? That evening, they shared another meal, this time discussing their experience in the maintenance tunnels and speculating about the mysterious device they'd discovered. The conversation flowed more naturally than ever before, with moments of shared humor and genuine intellectual exchange. "You know," Jamie said as they finished eating, "if someone had told me 4 days ago that I'd be having dinner with a Noctari princess and actually enjoying myself, I'd have thought they were crazy." Valeth's expression softened in what Jamie had come to recognize as her version of a smile. "And if someone had informed me that I would find a human's company genuinely stimulating, I might have questioned their cognitive function." "Is that a compliment?" Jamie asked, grinning. "An observation," Valeth replied, but the violet tinge on her cheekbones suggested something more. Later, as they prepared to retire to their respective chambers, Valeth paused at her doorway. The fifth phase traditionally begins after a period of individual reflection. I suggest we each take time tomorrow to consider what we have learned thus far, before proceeding. That sounds reasonable, Jamie agreed, though he felt a twinge of something like disappointment at the delay. Good night, Valeth. Rest well, Jamie, she replied, her voice carrying that resonant quality that seemed to linger in the air long after she had disappeared behind her door. As Jamie lay in his bed, staring at the starfield ceiling, he found himself trying to make sense of his own feelings. What had started as a diplomatic mishap, an embarrassing mistake to be managed and minimized, had evolved into something he wasn't quite ready to name. He thought about Valeth, her intelligence, her subtle humor, her profound insights into connection and communication, the way her obsidian eyes reflected starlight, the hint of violet that colored her cheeks when something moved her emotionally. This is ridiculous, he muttered to himself. She's not even human. But as he drifted toward sleep, Jamie couldn't help wondering if that distinction mattered less than he'd always assumed. The next morning, Jamie woke to find a message from Valeth displayed on his room's communication panel. She had been summoned to an urgent meeting with the Noctari delegation and would be absent for most of the day. The fifth phase evaluation would begin upon her return. Jamie felt oddly at loose ends without her presence. After 5 days of constant proximity, the quarters seemed strangely empty. He used the time to catch up on diplomatic correspondence, carefully composing the required daily report on their evaluation progress for the Cultural Exchange Division. In the official document, he kept his descriptions professional and focused on cultural exchange aspects of their interactions. What he couldn't include, were his growing personal observations. How Valeth's formal exterior had gradually given way to moments of surprising warmth. How her perspective on communication and connection had begun to change his own thinking. How the accidental proposal that had seemed a disaster less than a week ago now felt like something else entirely. A twist of fate that he was no longer certain he wanted to undo. Midway through the afternoon, Jamie was interrupted by Marai's holographic appearance in the main living area. Ambassador Stroud, your presence has been requested at an emergency council session. The AI announced. The matter concerns Princess Valeth and the ongoing evaluation. Jamie felt a spike of alarm. What's happened? I am not authorized to provide details, Marai replied. However, I can inform you that the Noctari delegation has filed a formal protest with the Galactic Council. Princess Valeth's current location is the main council chamber. Jamie didn't wait for further explanation. He changed quickly into his formal diplomatic attire and headed for the council chambers, mind racing with possibilities. Had something gone wrong with the trade negotiations? Had the Noctari leadership decided to terminate the evaluation after all? The council chamber was in chaos when he arrived. Representatives from a dozen species engaged in heated debate. Voices raised in multiple languages despite the translation systems struggling to keep pace. At the center of it all stood Valeth, her posture rigid with what Jamie now recognized as barely contained emotion. What's going on? Jamie asked, approaching a human aide he recognized from the diplomatic corps. The conservative faction of the council is trying to force a formal separation order, the aide explained quickly. They're claiming that the energy readings from your quarters indicate dangerous levels of emotional entanglement that violate the emotion clause. That's absurd, Jamie protested. The dampeners are containing any resonance effects. Yes, but apparently that's not enough for them. They're arguing that the mere existence of such effects between diplomatic representatives constitutes a violation of neutrality principles. The aide lowered her voice. Between you and me, I think they're just uncomfortable with the idea of a human and a Noctari forming any kind of connection. There are still a lot of old prejudices on the council. Jamie felt a surge of indignation. "Where's Dr. Thalos? She seemed reasonable yesterday." "Overruled by the Meridian delegation," the aide said. "They've invoked an obscure bylaw that allows for emergency separation orders in cases of clear and present emotional contamination." Jamie didn't bother hiding his disgust at the phrase. Emotional contamination? That sounds like something from a century ago. "Politics often lags behind reality," the aide agreed grimly. Before they could continue, a hush fell over the chamber as the council elder, a Chronosian whose actual age was the subject of much speculation, called for order. "The council will now hear final arguments regarding Resolution 42-7B, the proposed separation order for Ambassador Stroud of Earth and Princess Valeth of Noctari," the elder announced, their voice carrying despite its wispy quality. "As the affected parties are both present, they may each make a statement before the vote." A Meridian representative rose. "Elder, I object. Allowing the affected individuals to plead their own case violates the very principle we seek to protect. Their judgment is already compromised by emotional resonance." Murmurs of both agreement and disagreement rippled through the chamber. The elder raised a hand for silence. "Your objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Representative, the purpose of this hearing is precisely to determine whether such compromise exists. I will hear from both parties." The Meridian subsided, crystalline features glinting with obvious disapproval. "Princess Valeth," the elder continued, "you may speak first." Valeth stepped forward, her formal royal attire gleaming under the chamber's lights. When she spoke, her voice carried the full resonance of her heritage, filling the space without seeming to rise in volume. "Honored elder, esteemed representatives, I stand before you not merely as a princess of the Noctari, but as a diplomat committed to genuine understanding between species. The evaluation period between Ambassador Stroud and myself began as a result of cultural misinterpretation. Yes, but it has evolved into something far more significant, a living demonstration that meaningful connection can transcend the boundaries we too often treat as immutable." She paused, her obsidian gaze sweeping the chamber. The emotion clause was established with noble intent, to prevent personal attachments from distorting diplomatic objectivity. But in its rigid application, it has become a tool for enforcing separation rather than ensuring integrity. True diplomacy requires not the absence of emotion, but the honest acknowledgement of its presence and influence. Murmurs rose again, louder this time. The energy readings that have caused such concern are not evidence of compromise, but of compatibility. Proof that even between species as different as humans and Noctari, resonance is possible. To terminate this evaluation prematurely would be to reject not only Noctari cultural tradition, but the very possibility of deeper understanding between our peoples. As Valeth concluded, Jamie found himself moved by both her words and the quiet passion behind them. This was not the cool, formal diplomat he'd first encountered, but someone who had found a cause worth fighting for, the right to explore a connection that defied conventional expectations. "Ambassador Stroud," the elder said, turning to Jamie, "you may now address the council." Jamie stepped forward, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes and other sensory organs trained on him. He had prepared no statement, had no idea what he would say until the words began to form. "When I accidentally proposed to Princess Valeth 6 days ago, it was because of a joke, a moment of human sarcasm that translated poorly across cultural boundaries. I thought it was the biggest diplomatic blunder of my career." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wrong." Jamie looked around the chamber, meeting the gazes of various representatives. "What began as a misunderstanding has become the most profound cultural exchange of my life. Not because of formal protocols or carefully structured negotiations, but because two individuals from vastly different worlds chose to approach each other with genuine curiosity and openness." He turned slightly, catching Valeth's eye briefly before continuing. The Galactic Council exists to facilitate understanding and cooperation between species. Yet here we are, debating whether to forcibly separate two people because they might be forming a meaningful connection. What does that say about our true commitment to interspecies relations? The chamber had grown very quiet. Flirting should not be criminalized, Jamie said, surprising himself with the directness of the statement. Nor should any form of sincere emotional expression between consenting individuals, regardless of their species or diplomatic status. If we truly believe in the possibility of meaningful cooperation across differences, we must be willing to allow those differences to be bridged not just intellectually, but emotionally as well. He straightened, finding confidence in the truth of his own words. I move that this council not only reject the separation order, but reconsider the emotion clause itself in light of evolving understanding of cross-species relations. Let our evaluation continue to its natural conclusion, and let it stand as evidence that connection across difference is not something to fear, but to explore with courage and integrity. As Jamie finished, the chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some supportive, others outraged. The elder called repeatedly for order, their wispy voice nearly lost in the din. In the midst of the chaos, Valeth moved to stand beside Jamie, her presence a point of calm in the storm. A compelling argument, she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Particularly the part about flirting. Despite the tension of the moment, Jamie felt a smile tug at his lips. Seemed appropriate, given how this all started. Before Valeth could respond, the chamber doors burst open, and a figure Jamie recognized as the station's chief of security strode in, followed by several officers escorting a handcuffed Meridian. Elder, representatives. I apologize for the interruption, the security chief announced, her voice cutting through the noise. But we have discovered information relevant to these proceedings. The elder gestured for silence. Speak, Chief Navarro. The unauthorized monitoring device discovered yesterday by Ambassador Stroud and Princess Valeth has been traced to this individual, she said, indicating the handcuffed Meridian. Upon interrogation, they have admitted to placing the device as part of a deliberate attempt to disrupt human-Noctari relations before the trade agreement could be finalized. Gasps and exclamations filled the chamber. Furthermore, Navarro continued, we have evidence that this individual and their associates have been behind the push to invoke the emotion clause and force a separation order. Their goal was to create a diplomatic incident that would derail the upcoming trade negotiations. The council elders' ancient features hardened with rare anger. These are serious allegations, Chief Navarro. With serious evidence to support them, Navarro confirmed. The full report has been transmitted to your secure channel. Elder. As the implications of this revelation rippled through the chamber, the mood shifted palpably. Representatives who had been arguing for separation moments before now fell silent, while others began to voice support for Jamie and Valeth. The elder conferred briefly with several senior representatives before addressing the chamber again. In light of this new information, the vote on Resolution 42 with 7B is suspended indefinitely. Furthermore, I am ordering a full review of the circumstances surrounding this case, including the application and interpretation of the emotion clause. The elder's gaze settled on Jamie and Valeth. The evaluation period will continue without further interference, and I would personally like to commend both Ambassador Stroud and Princess Valeth for their service to this station in uncovering the monitoring device, which might otherwise have caused significant harm. With that declaration, the emergency session was adjourned. As representatives filed out of the chamber, many now regarding Jamie and Valeth with new interest and respect, the two found themselves momentarily alone in the eye of the departing storm. Well, Jamie said, still processing everything that had happened. That was unexpected. Indeed, Valeth agreed. though perhaps not entirely surprising. The monitoring device did seem suspiciously placed. "And convenient timing for us," Jamie observed. "Almost like something out of a story. The villains revealed just in time to save the day." Valeth's expression softened into what Jamie now recognized as her version of amusement. Reality often contains elements that would seem contrived in fiction. As they left the council chamber together, Jamie found himself wondering about the path that had led them here. From an accidental proposal to standing side by side before the Galactic Council, defending their right to explore whatever was developing between them. "You spoke well," Valeth said as they walked. "Your argument was both logical and passionate." "So did you," Jamie replied. "I was impressed by your willingness to challenge the Council's assumptions." They continued in companionable silence for a moment before Valeth spoke again. "Your statement about flirting not being criminalized, was that intended as humor?" "Partly," Jamie admitted, "but also partly serious. The whole situation started because I made a joke that crossed cultural boundaries. But that doesn't mean the connection that followed isn't real." Valeth considered this. "In Noctari culture, we have a concept called truth in jest, the idea that humor often reveals what formal speech conceals." "We have something similar," Jamie said. "Many a truth is spoken in jest." "Perhaps, then," Valeth suggested, her voice taking on a quality Jamie hadn't heard before. "Your initial flirtation contained a kernel of truth that neither of us recognized at the time." The implication hung in the air between them as they returned to their shared quarters, both aware that the fifth phase of evaluation, the deep resonance testing, still awaited them, and after the events of the day, it carried new significance for them both. That evening, their quarters seemed different somehow, the same space, but charged with a new awareness. The resonance dampeners hummed softly in the corners, but Jamie wondered if any technology could truly contain what was building between them. "The fifth phase traditionally begins at twilight," Valeth explained, as the station's lighting cycle began to dim, simulating evening. "A time of transition between states, symbolizing the transition from individual to shared consciousness." The main living area had transformed while they were away. The circular depression in the center, now filled with what appeared to be cushions, made from the same shadow-like material as Noctari clothing. Small, floating lights hovered at various heights around the circle, creating an atmosphere that reminded Jamie of ancient Earth rituals. "It's beautiful," he said, taking in the transformed space. "Marai assisted with the arrangements," Valeth acknowledged, "though I provided the specifications." Jamie noticed that Valeth had changed from her formal council attire into something simpler, draped layers in deep indigo that seemed to flow around her tall form like water. Her silver-streaked hair was loose, falling past her shoulders in a way that softened her usual regal appearance. "Should I change?" Jamie asked, suddenly aware that he was still in his formal diplomatic uniform. "If you wish to be more comfortable," Valeth said. "The resonance process can be intense. Restrictive clothing is not recommended." Jamie felt his face warm slightly at the implications, but nodded and retreated to his chamber. He changed into the most comfortable clothing he could find, soft pants and a loose tunic in muted blue tones that somehow complemented Valeth's indigo. When he returned, Valeth was seated in the center of the cushioned circle, her long limbs folded in a position of meditative readiness. "Before we begin," she said as Jamie approached, "I must explain what to expect. Normally, this phase would involve a direct sharing of emotional energy between Noctari, a deliberate lowering of the barriers that usually contain our resonance capabilities." "And with a human?" Jamie asked, settling onto the cushions across from her. "Unknown," Valeth admitted. "There are no records of a full resonance bond being attempted between a Noctari and a human. However, our previous interactions, particularly your song and my response to it, suggest some degree of compatibility exists." Jamie nodded, remembering the lights that had appeared around Valeth when he sang. So, what do we do? We begin with physical proximity and controlled breathing, Valeth explained. Then progress to guided focus on emotional states. If resonance begins to develop, you may experience unusual sensations, visual or auditory impressions not tied to physical stimuli, emotional echoes that feel both familiar and foreign, perhaps even glimpses of memory or thought not your own. That sounds intimate, Jamie said, echoing her earlier description. It is, Valeth confirmed, her obsidian eyes meeting his directly. Which is why I must ask, are you certain you wish to proceed? There is no obligation to complete this phase. We could declare the evaluation inconclusive and part as diplomatic colleagues, with no loss of status or respect. Jamie considered the question seriously. This was his chance to back away, to return to the comfortable boundaries of professional diplomacy. The safer choice, certainly. The more predictable path. And yet, I want to proceed, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Whatever happens, I think we owe it to ourselves to see this through. Something flickered in Valeth's eyes. Relief? Anticipation? Then we shall begin. Move closer, until our knees are touching. Jamie shifted forward on the cushions until his knees made contact with Valeth's. Even through the fabric of their clothing, he felt that same warm tingle he'd experienced in the maintenance tunnels when their arms had brushed. Now, offer your hands, palms upward, Valeth instructed. Jamie complied, extending his hands before him. Valeth placed her 7-fingered hands above his, not quite touching. We will breathe together first, she said, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality, matching rhythm and depth. As you exhale, imagine releasing any resistance or barrier you might be holding. As you inhale, visualize drawing in light and energy. They began to breathe in unison, the simple act creating a surprising sense of connection. Jamie found himself relaxing into the rhythm, his awareness of the room around them gradually receding as his focus narrowed to Valeth's face, her hands hovering above his, the synchronized pattern of their breathing. Good, Valeth murmured after several minutes of this. Now, I will lower my hands to touch yours. The initial contact may feel intense. Jamie nodded, preparing himself. When Valeth's hands finally made contact with his, the sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, like plunging into warm water charged with electricity, but pleasant rather than painful. A tingling heat spread up his arms and throughout his body. What you're feeling is the first level of resonance, Valeth explained, her voice sounding both close and distant somehow. Your nervous system interpreting energy patterns it was not designed to process. It's, wow, Jamie managed, finding it difficult to form coherent thoughts as the sensation intensified. Focus on your emotional center, Valeth guided. Not your thoughts about emotions, but the raw feeling itself, whatever is most present for you in this moment. Jamie tried to follow her instructions, reaching past his analytical mind to the feelings beneath. Curiosity was there, certainly. Nervousness too. But underneath those, something deeper, a sense of wonder, of opening to possibility, of being precisely where he was meant to be. As he connected with that feeling, the tingling sensation transformed, becoming more like music felt through the body rather than heard with the ears. The floating lights around them began to pulse in rhythm with their breathing. Yes, Valeth whispered, her voice taking on that resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in Jamie's chest. You are finding the way. The sensation continued to evolve, colors beginning to swirl at the edges of Jamie's vision, not seen with his eyes, but perceived somehow directly by his consciousness. He had the strange impression that the boundaries of his body were becoming less defined, his awareness expanding beyond his skin. And then, Without warning, he felt it. A presence that was distinctly Valeth, yet experienced from within, rather than without. Not her thoughts exactly, but her essence, the emotional core of her being touching his. The experience was overwhelming in its intimacy. He sensed her curiosity mirroring his own, her wonder at the unexpected connection forming between them. Beneath that, something that felt like centuries of careful restraint, now cautiously yielding to possibility. Jamie gasped as the connection deepened, bringing flashes of sensation that weren't his own. How it felt to move in a body with different proportions, to see with eyes that perceived a wider spectrum, to exist in a culture where emotional energy was as tangible as physical matter. Through it all, he remained distinctly himself, even as he experienced aspects of Valeth's reality, not a merging of identities, but a profound sharing between distinct beings. "This is incredible," he managed to say, though he wasn't sure if he spoke the words aloud or merely thought them. "Yes," came Valeth's response, similarly ambiguous in its transmission. "You are remarkably receptive for a human. The compatibility is unexpected." The resonance continued to build. The dampeners in the corners of the room now glowing brightly as they worked to contain the energy being generated. The floating lights pulsed faster, shifting through colors that seemed to match the emotional tones flowing between them. And then, at what felt like the peak of intensity, something new emerged, a visual impression that Jamie somehow knew they were both experiencing simultaneously. A pattern of light and energy that resembled a flower, similar to the soul bloom they had seen in the hydroponics bay, but more complex, more vibrant, its petals unfolding in impossible dimensions. "The resonance bloom," Valeth's voice came, filled with awe. "It manifests only in cases of profound compatibility." The flower continued to unfold in their shared perception, each petal revealing new patterns within patterns, a fractal expression of their connection. As it reached full expansion, a wave of emotion washed through Jamie, not just his own, not just Valeth's, but something new created between them. A recognition so profound it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. Gradually, the intensity began to subside. The flower image slowly faded. The colors at the edges of his vision receded, and Jamie became aware again of his physical body, the cushions beneath him, his hands still in contact with Valeth's, their knees touching. When he opened eyes, he hadn't realized he'd closed. He found Valeth looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before, wonder mixed with something that might have been joy. "That was," Jamie began, but found words entirely inadequate. "Yes," Valeth agreed, understanding his meaning without needing the words. "It was." They remained connected for a moment longer, neither wanting to break the lingering resonance between them. When they finally separated their hands, Jamie felt a sense of loss, but also a new awareness of Valeth that persisted even without physical contact, as if a channel had been opened between them that remained partially active. "Is it always like that?" Jamie asked, when he'd regained enough composure to speak normally. "No," Valeth said simply. "What we experienced was exceptional. Even among Noctari, the resonance bloom is rare, manifesting perhaps once in a generation." "And between different species?" "Unknown," Valeth replied. "There are no records of such an occurrence. We may well be the first." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Whatever had happened transcended cultural misunderstanding, diplomatic protocol, or even the courtship evaluation itself. It was something new, unexpected, and profound. "What happens now?" Jamie asked softly. Valeth was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Traditionally, the manifestation of a resonance bloom would be considered conclusive evidence of compatibility. The evaluation would be deemed successful, and formal union preparations would begin. "And in our case?" Jamie pressed gently. Where tradition doesn't quite apply? In our case, Valeth said, meeting his gaze directly. I believe we must write our own tradition. Whatever path we choose from here must honor both the significance of what we've experienced and the practical realities of our different lives and responsibilities. Jamie nodded, appreciating her balanced perspective even as his mind raced with possibilities. That sounds wise, though I have to admit, I never imagined my accidental proposal would lead to this. A smile, a real, unmistakable smile, curved Valeth's lips. Sometimes, Jamie Stroud, the universe has plans that our careful diplomacy cannot anticipate. Apparently so, Jamie agreed, returning her smile. So, where do we start with this tradition writing? Perhaps, Valeth suggested, by acknowledging that what began as a cultural misunderstanding has become something genuine, and that whatever form our connection takes moving forward, it will be chosen consciously, rather than dictated by circumstance or convention. I like that approach, Jamie said, and I think step one might be getting some rest. That resonance experience was amazing, but I'm exhausted. A reasonable suggestion, Valeth agreed. Resonance requires significant energy, especially for one not accustomed to the experience. They rose from the cushioned circle, both somewhat unsteady. At the doorway to his chamber, Jamie paused. Valeth. Yes? Whatever happens next, I'm glad I made that stupid joke 6 days ago. The violet flush returned to her cheekbones. As am I, Jamie. As am I. The final day of the evaluation period dawned with a sense of anticipation. Jamie woke feeling different, more aware of his own emotional states, and with a lingering sense of Valeth's presence, even though she was in her separate chamber. When they met for the morning meal, there was a new ease between them, the resonance experience having created a foundation of understanding that transcended words. The evaluation period officially concludes today, Valeth said as they ate. We must prepare a formal report for the Cultural Exchange Division. What exactly do we tell them? Jamie asked. That we experienced a cross-species resonance bloom that's apparently unprecedented in galactic history? Perhaps a slightly more diplomatic phrasing, Valeth suggested, amusement in her voice. But essentially, yes, the truth, however unexpected. They spent the morning drafting the report together, finding a balance between technical accuracy and respect for the personal nature of their experience. The document acknowledged the unusual circumstances that had initiated the evaluation, detailed the cultural exchange aspects of their interactions, and confirmed a positive outcome in terms of mutual understanding and respect. What it didn't attempt to fully explain was the profound connection they had discovered. Some things, they agreed, belonged to them alone, not to bureaucratic record. As midday approached, they received notification that the Nocturi delegation and Earth's diplomatic representatives would be arriving for the formal conclusion ceremony, a tradition that normally would have involved family members and community elders, adapted in this case to their unique situation. Are you nervous? Jamie asked as they prepared. Nervous is not the precise term, Valeth replied, adjusting her formal attire. But I am anticipating various reactions. Jamie understood what she meant. Their unexpected compatibility would raise questions, challenge assumptions, perhaps even create diplomatic complications. But after everything they'd experienced together, those concerns seemed secondary to the reality of their connection. The ceremony itself was brief but dignified. Representatives from both Earth and Noctari formally acknowledged the completion of the evaluation period and received their report. Dr. Thalos, representing the Galactic Council, officially rescinded any remaining restrictions on their interaction. The Council extends its apologies for the interference attempt, she said, her iridescent skin shifting through subtle patterns that indicated sincerity in her species. And congratulates you both on what appears to be a historic development in cross-species relations. As the official proceedings concluded and the representatives began to disperse, Jamie found himself momentarily alone with Valeth. "So," he said, "technically, we're no longer engaged. The evaluation is complete." "Technically correct," Valeth agreed, a hint of that new smile playing at her lips. "The accidental proposal has been fully addressed through proper cultural protocols." "Which means," Jamie continued, feeling suddenly nervous but determined, "that if someone wanted to propose again, intentionally this time, they'd be starting fresh." Valeth's obsidian eyes widened slightly. "That is a logical conclusion." Jamie took a deep breath. "Valeth, I know this is all happening incredibly fast by any rational standard. A week ago, we barely knew each other. But after everything we've experienced, the resonance, the bloom, the connection I still feel even now, I don't want to just go back to being diplomatic colleagues." "Nor do I," Valeth admitted softly. "I'm not saying we should jump into marriage," Jamie clarified. "But I'd like to explore whatever this is between us. Properly, intentionally, without accidental cultural misunderstandings or council interference or evaluation protocols." "You are proposing courtship?" Valeth asked, the violet flush returning to her cheekbones. "Yes," Jamie said, finding confidence in the certainty of his feelings. "A real one this time. Not because I accidentally triggered a cultural tradition, but because I want to know you better. Because what we've discovered is too remarkable to walk away from." Valeth was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then, in a gesture that surprised him, she extended her seven-fingered hand, palm upward, an echo of their resonance position from the night before. "In Noctari tradition," she said, "a courtship accepted by choice, rather than convention, begins with an offering of mutual possibility." Jamie placed his hand on hers, feeling again that warm tingle of connection. "And what does that mean, exactly?" "It means," Valeth said, her voice carrying that resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in his chest, "that we acknowledge what has begun between us, and commit to discovering where it might lead, not bound by tradition or expectation, but guided by the resonance we have found." "I like that tradition," Jamie said, smiling as he felt the connection between them strengthen through their joined hands. "It feels right." As they stood together, hands linked in the formal conclusion chamber, Jamie marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a throwaway joke born of exhaustion to a connection so profound it manifested as a flower of light in their shared consciousness. "You know," he said, "on Earth we have a saying, 'Life is what happens while you're making other plans.'" "A wise observation," Valeth replied. "Among my people, we say, the most profound truths often enter through the door of misconception." Jamie laughed softly. "I guess I should be grateful for cultural misunderstandings. Then, perhaps," Valeth agreed, her eyes reflecting the stars, visible through the chamber's viewing portal. "We all should be." 1 month later, Jamie found himself back on Earth for the first time since the infamous proposal incident. He'd been summoned to diplomatic headquarters for what he assumed would be a formal debriefing, possibly even a reprimand despite the ultimately positive outcome of the situation. Instead, he was surprised to find himself being offered a new position, Special Envoy for Noctari Relations, with a mandate to build on the unexpected breakthrough in human Noctari understanding. "Your experience with Princess Valeth has created possibilities we never anticipated," his supervisor explained. "The resonance phenomenon you reported has sparked interest throughout the xenobiology and diplomatic communities. We want you to continue that work, officially this time." "And the Noctari government?" Jamie asked. "What's their position?" "They've appointed Princess Valeth as their counterpart," came the reply. "Apparently, she made quite a compelling case for establishing a formal cross-species resonance research initiative." Jamie couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. He and Valeth had been corresponding daily since parting at Sargasso Bloom. their connection maintained across the vastness of space through a combination of conventional communication and the lingering resonance bond they shared. But the prospect of working together officially, of continuing to explore their unique connection with institutional support, was better than he could have hoped for. 2 days later, as he waited in a private diplomatic lounge at the main Earth spaceport, Jamie felt a familiar warmth in his chest, a resonance that had grown stronger rather than fading with time and distance. He turned toward the arrival gate just as Valeth emerged, her tall figure drawing curious glances from humans unaccustomed to Noctari visitors. She spotted him immediately, moving with her characteristic grace through the crowd. As she approached, Jamie saw that she wore a simplified version of Noctari formal attire, but with a new addition, a small brooch in the shape of a blooming flower, crafted from earth silver and Noctari crystal. "Ambassador Stroud," she said formally, aware of the public setting. "Princess Valeth," he replied with equal formality, before adding more softly, "It's good to see you." "And you," she said, the familiar violet flush touching her cheekbones. "I trust your journey home was uneventful." "Nowhere near as interesting as my last diplomatic assignment," Jamie said with a smile. As they left the spaceport together, heading toward the Earth diplomatic compound, where Valeth would be staying, Jamie felt a sense of anticipation about the path ahead. Their story had begun with a misunderstanding, evolved through cultural exchange, and blossomed into something neither of them could have predicted. "I've been thinking," he said as they traveled in a private transport pod, "about what to call this thing we're doing. Cross-species resonance research initiative is a bit of a mouthful." "What would you suggest?" Valeth asked, her obsidian eyes reflecting the passing cityscape. "How about Project Bloom?" Jamie suggested. "Simple, meaningful to us, but not too revealing to others." "Project Bloom," Valeth repeated, the words carrying that resonant quality he'd come to love. "Yes, I think that captures the essence quite well." As they continued toward the compound, discussing their official duties and personal plans for her Earth visit, Jamie reflected on the strange series of events that had brought them together. A joke, a misunderstanding, a proposal never intended, but somehow perfectly timed. And now, a future neither of them could have imagined, unfolding one day at a time like the petals of a resonance bloom, unexpected, beautiful, and filled with possibility. In the end, perhaps the most profound diplomatic breakthrough of Jamie's career hadn't come from careful negotiation or cultural study, but from a moment of unguarded humanity, a flirtation spoken in jest that had somehow found its way to truth. And as he felt the warm resonance of Valeth's presence beside him, Jamie couldn't help but think that some mistakes, it seemed, were worth making after all.